Hello, Val.
Hello there.
Thank you for doing this. This came all from a conversation we had at Christmas, where you spontaneously came to visit us, and we were so blessed, and we loved it every minute. And when you shared what you shared with us, then I thought it'd be good to test ourselves and challenge ourselves, and say, let's record this and share it for the people, because I was very much blessed and you enlightened me, and I was blown away by what you've done. And because this is a very new and completely unique thing, I don't think I've ever heard this,
Mm.
and I don't think there is anything like this anywhere else. So I wanted to talk to you about your audacious black love, basically. And so before we get to that, I think it would be really good for you to just give a brief overview of how did you come to audacious black love, and what was the journey to get to this point, and who are you basically?
The audacious black love is quite interesting because that came out of my conversation with you, and I had previously done a lecture at Reading University called The Audacity of Black Love because of the work that I do around generating new conversations that relate to black women's desire to marry and the challenges around that, which have been what term we use in sociology, misrecognized. But anyway, I'm a sociologist and I lecture in higher education in sociology. And as a Christian, I see myself as a follower of the way. And I'm coming to refer to myself in that way because there is just so much that I'm discovering about God as I follow his way. You can be a Christian and follow traditions, the traditions of your organization, or you can just be a member of society and follow the traditions of your society. But I believe that when you decide to be a follower of the way, you extract yourself from traditions and discover an, a counter reality, which is what Christ is pointing out to us to say there's another way to exist. I think that's it in a nutshell. The journey around black women and singleness started a very long time ago. I was married many years ago, and I remember at my wedding, some of my friends being happy and joyous, but also a bit tearful because they wanted to marry. And it was, they'd experienced quite a lot of challenges. I remember feeling triggered by that. And when I had my children, having conversations with my girlfriends who had married, we would gather and talk about babies, etc. And I would always find myself saying, but what about our friends who haven't married? And that was just something that always stirred me. I don't know why. I don't know why it stirred me. Uh, I sensed that there was something going on in our community, in the Black Caribbean community, Black British Caribbean community, that needed to have shape. But anyway, years later, I found myself divorced and as a single mother. And then I walked the road of singleness. And it was quite normal in our community to be a Black Caribbean British woman with children and no partner. There was something very normal about that, even though I found it very traumatic. But people's response to me was, it was like it wasn't really an issue. And so I started considering this whole issue of black women and singleness even more. And that's when I decided, during that period of singleness, I decided to face my Goliath and begin doing research around black women and singleness. And I call it a Goliath, facing my Goliath, because I honestly felt that if I started taking this pathway, I would be single for the rest of my life.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it took me maybe 6 months of struggle,
Mm.
But I just felt this burning and I just thought, I'm gonna do this, even if it means I will be alone, because people typecast you as a feminist and all of that. I don't mind being called a feminist, but in a way that it's like you're not into love and relationships and all of that. And I just thought, so be it. I just need to find out more. So that's my PhD is actually around Black women in religious spaces who are single.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I looked into the sociology of Black women and singleness.
Wow. And so through all of that journey, you this is how you came up with this concept. Maybe before we go into what was the result, but what is the concept? Like what did we talk about when we had this
Yeah,
audacious black love? Because to me, that was, I think, the most interesting part.
yeah,
And why did it come around?
yeah.
So if you could just explain to me again, how did audacious black love come? What is the concept actually?
It started with, after my PhD, I had an experience one day in the car where I just felt that God was saying to me, I want you to give shape to this burning that you have around Black women and singleness. By this time, I'd been married, got married again, and my children were grown, but the fire was still there.
So this journey's been
It's many years, yeah, through my having my children, my marriage breaking up, thinking about it, reflecting on it, talking to Black women, then doing my research, getting married again, still having that burning, that passion around this issue. So then here I am in the car, and I'm having a conversation with God, and it's like my mind just opened up and a course just downloaded into my head.
oh wow.
Just a whole course. It was just like, it was so powerful that all I could do was park up the car and cry. And then I just thought, I have to start this course. So I started to run seminars and to just raise the issue in the community. And then from that, I developed the Black Women's Transformational course, which is a course for Black women who want to marry. And I wrote a self-help book called The 7 Habits for Black Women Who Want to Marry. So I started running training courses with groups of 15 women, 5 women, just different groups of women who would come together, and it would be a range of 5 or 7 sessions, taking them through the different steps towards marriage. And this is not a psychological piece of work. It's actually showing Black women that their desire to marry is really important, which they have struggled with. This is about extracting aspects of Black women's identities that are under the radar. The fact that they do desire love and marriage, and they're not just strong Black women holding up communities, cooking in the kitchens, holding up organizations, being the only Black person as a CEO in an organization, that they do desire. There is a side of them that desires that kind of emotional and physical intimacy. And I think that has been lost in these overriding narratives of strength and resilience, and they're so amazing and they're so spiritual. Those narratives about Black women are very strong. So my work is about really saying to them, let's come together in a space and let's be honest, and let's say to ourselves, let's anchor that truth in as part of our identity work. But when we're doing that, we're giving a gift back to ourselves and also to our community. And so one of my mantras is, it matters to God that Black women are single, and we can do something about it. And as a result of that, after running maybe 4 courses, we've had, I think it's 4 weddings in a short period of time. We really rejoiced that some of the participants have understood that getting married, loving the way that they want to love, and loving a black man in particular
Mm-hmm.
is a way of building community. It's not just, this is somebody I desire and I just want to get married and be individualistic and go off on a white horse with my partner and my children. And it's not about that. It's about employing the love that we feel for our men as a resource to build a fragmented and broken community, to provide a source of healing for the next generation. It's intentional work and it's collective work. So when you love a black man, it symbolizes loving community. This is not to disparage mixed relationships or anything, but it's just to give space for that truth
Mm.
that exists in many communities, but because it's normalized in other communities, nobody needs to speak about it. But because in what I call post-enslaved communities, one of the relationships that was destroyed was the relationship between men and women.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, because obviously for people who are not so aware of all of this, what was it that it was very unique to black women and the love that they were getting or not getting? Because you enlightened me when we talked about the historic element of that. Because I think obviously there is a stereotype for certain strong women, like you've said, they're independent, they don't need all that. But what was very enlightening to me when you talked is just how did you get to this level? And then the trauma that is generational, even before slavery, before all of that. What was the reason why in today's society this is quite tricky? And the fact that your course has given, you've had four cohorts, as it were, and out of those four cohorts who I guess wanted to get married but couldn't for whatever reason, they went through your course and then they got healing and they got married.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, that is a nice thing. But so how did you come about changing that historic element? And what is the historic element that, because I think to me that is like the biggest mind-blowing thing that I never realized.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about the historic element?
Yeah.
Where and how did we get to this?
So I call it plantation culture or plantocracy. You say plantocracy, it's got the economic element to it. If you take a group of young people, what happened was young people from the African continent were, according to history anyway, were taken from Africa and placed on an island, a volcanic island for the most part. And from that, they created the plantation. And the plantation existed to feed the colonial master and colonial countries. And so you would have these bodies on the plantations that were just resources. And these bodies were objectified through beatings and whatever, but their function was purely to reproduce, to cut pain, etc., to build up the sugar industries for white society. And part of that meant reproduction of more children, more labor, and rape and forced sexual relations was just part of it. It was just part of it. So it's almost like the black woman's body became, not almost like, in actual fact, her body became a vestibule to carry the worker or the slave for the next generation. Really, even if you look at capitalism in society, that there's an argument that's what workers are for. The working classes were used in a similar way. But going back to the Caribbean, getting connected to a man, men and women coming together and forming long-term relationships, that was not economically viable. And if they did want to marry, they would have to get the permission of the master. And he could allow them to come together or break up the marriage as will, depending on whether or not he wanted the man, for example, to go onto another plantation and for his body to be used to reproduce another set of slaves, because slave masters would get together and say, this man, he's tall and strong, and I've got a woman who's tall and strong. They can reproduce for us the next generation of slaves. So that's basically what happened. And that was going on for generations. And then there was liberation, which was, and maybe 100 years after liberation, these countries became independent. But the trauma of these fractured relationships, where, if I could describe the fear, disrespect between the genders, distrust between the genders, colorism was used. So if a woman had a child with the slave master, the child would be a different shade. And that shade then created what we call pigmentocracy, hierarchies around skin tone and featureism. So if a child looks more like the slave master, then that child would have the opportunity to go and work in the slave master's house, and not on the field. And they would be more expensive. They would be more, so they could actually, the slave master could get more money. So they would sell their children, their offspring, because they were just seen as they need to generate more slaves to keep the whole system going. So this created a lot of trauma and self-loathing within Black cultures. And there are other elements as well. And then it manifests itself. So the liberation came, independence came, but the work to bring about healing and to provide spaces for people to recover from that kind of history. And it wasn't just 40 years of exploitation, it was generations and generations.
400, right?
Yeah, more or less. So you can see how ingrained these things are. So coming to England and then having wide opportunities to engage in British society, etc., did not take away that, what can I say, the kind of psychological desire for the master.
Right.
And attempts at integration, Black people in the 60s and 70s were fighting to integrate into white society, and they're fighting for equality. But a massive aspect of that was integration. They wanted to be part of the white society. And then so as we had legislations to accommodate us, etc., it didn't provide space for us as a collective. Maybe some individuals did, but as a collective to say, do we choose? We want white society to choose us, but can we choose ourselves? And if not, why not? Why is liberation all about being accepted by white society still? Why isn't it about us accepting ourselves? And why are our marriages breaking up? Why are we having all of this fracturing and disaffection? These kinds of questions were not adequately addressed. And for me, one of the ways in which we can begin that conversation is to look at the marriage rates between black on black love. That, for me, provides an avenue to begin that kind of conversation. So for me, love and us choosing each other is not just an individualistic thing. It's about a resource for healing, because it's a symbol and it's a trigger to the next generation. Because the next generation, the succeeding generations, they understand that there isn't enough love in the community.
I just want to go back to, because to me what was very interesting is when you think about the whole Slavery Act, where people were in Africa living their lives, they were taken. It wasn't taken, they were stolen by usually black people were sold them. It wasn't the white people that came in and sold the slaves to the white masters. It was, and what I want to just go into a bit more depth, because it's something I didn't appreciate, at the mechanical element of that in the generations, like how you explained before, you were saying that people were treated just as literal machines to do a function. And when that function was surplus, then it was done, right? You were done and dusted. And a function was creating kids and growing them. And a problem in having those functions, you said, which was really interesting, is love breaks that, because as soon as you see, and this is one thing that I want you to talk a bit more about, is when the master saw that there is love and tenderness between a man and a woman, there was very proactive elements to destroy that.
Yeah.
Because it destroyed the machine and undermined the
Yeah.
machine. Can you talk more about that? Because that, to me, I never ever thought that how that would affect the community that was watching and that was actually being, because people are not machines. And the deliberate attempts of
I read this article where
that would be good.
This author was saying that it was seen when they looked at what was going on in Jamaica. The author quoted from one slave master he took the view that it was seen, the word that they used was impertinence. I remember that it was seen as impertinent for slaves to marry, and it was seen as a civilizing act. So it was something that only civilized Christians could do, but it wasn't something that the uncivilized, idol worshipper, as that's how they were viewed, because slavery was seen as, or promoted as, something that could enable the African to have closer relationships with the white master, because at least they're going to learn a little bit about Christianity and see some aspects of civilization or the civilizing process. But for some islands, for the slaves to get married, that was seen as an impertinence, and it was seen as you're coming out of your place. You're stepping out of line here, because this is what we do. This is what white society does. So, yes, I want to also say something about, mentioned that it wasn't just white people coming and taking the slaves. There's a lot of debate about that, but certainly there's a misunderstanding that there's people say Africans and they think all Africans are the same, but there are different groups, and there were competitions, and they had what they would call like the spoils of war. So if you won the war, then you would take people to come and live in your household and be your slaves. But there's enough scholarship that shows that even in those situations, those slaves had the opportunity to rise to the ranks. And you see some of that in some of the biblical narratives around slavery. It wasn't, even though it was a situation of inequality, these people were actually seen as humans, even though they were enslaved. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so and I think that African scholars are at pains, and other scholars at pains, to excavate some of those nuances to undermine this kind of backlash. Africans enslaved Africans in that very simplistic way. So there was a system. You capture the slave, you capture people, and they come under your jurisdiction. But should those people be freed, they can go back to their communities. And the very communities that had enslaved may end up 20 years down the road being enslaved to themselves, because it was all part of the warfare. And it was a system that was exploited, taken advantage of. And of course, you're going to have, so they would then give their spoils of war to the Europeans when they came. So they would collaborate with them. Yeah, so it's a much more sophisticated
it's not
system rather than they were just giving up their children. People were not giving up their children and whatever.
And that's important, right? Because thank you for letting me know. See, I learned something new as well.
Yeah.
But okay, so through the generational element, the breakdown of, or the, I would say, the alienation of love was very systematic.
Yeah.
Right? And it was eradicated at the earliest sign. And
yeah, it was difficult right from the beginning because they did take people from different parts and different ethnic groups and bring them together onto a plantation. So they didn't speak the same language and whatever. But obviously, after a time, the first generation and then the second generation, they started to carve out some kind of society. But they were still controlled by white systems. And some slave masters were considerate and allowed them to marry if it was in their favor, or they felt some kind of guilt as Christians and would allow their slaves to marry. But in general, marriage was not something that it was not normalized. And certainly loving a black person wasn't normalized, because the way that if you're a minority, which the white man would be a minority in the Caribbean setting, then, or if you want to think about in the American setting, you have to have systems of control. And one of the things that you're going to do is divide to conquer. So I talked about pigmentocracy, that dividing people and saying you are better than because you're closer to a white person is one way of dividing. All right. And then not trusting a man. So very much in the socialization of women in the Caribbean is a distrust of men. And even myself growing up, my mother used to say to me and my sister, which is what she was told, is that you've got to do very well. You've got to get your education because no man is going to mind you. But she would say, no man going to mind you. I didn't quite understand what it meant when I was small, but I grew up with that term. No man going to mind you. No, sort yourself out. So those kinds of narratives speak to the fact that you could be on the plantation and you start to build a relationship with a man and then he's taken away. There's nothing you can do. So the women had to find a way to build that resilience. They would be left with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 children. And they're anxious and scared for their children who would be taken. And so the only way that they could cope with that level of responsibility and the fear and the trauma and your children being taken and sexually used by the master and coming back pregnant and all of that, is this incredible resilience. And that's just been passed on as a way of existing. It's just so normalized. And if you say, in my research, I asked the women, describe yourself. And most of them said, I'm a strong black woman. It's like, what? It was just so constant. I'm a strong black woman. And they all had narratives of being strong and that how important it was. So I call it SBW, strong black woman, single black woman. SBW plus SBW. Or SBW equals SBW, single black woman.
Okay. Interesting. Sorry, I'm just going to... We were just having a break and talking about it, but to me, as a white man, it's so important to understand the historical element because we only look at people through the eyes that we see from here, right? But when you think about the person that is in front of you, we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, right? There is a whole element that is beneath that forms that person and the society and the culture, right? And For me, what was the most amazing is this understanding this iceberg of black culture, black women especially. Where did it come from and why is it like that? I think it's really key to understand because I never really appreciated to what kind of, I don't know, how would you call it, but people were used as cogs in the wheel. If that one was broken, get another one. And that's such an alien concept culturally now. Okay, capitalism does that. You mentioned that as the employee is, but you still, as an employee, have rights. Whereas literally, there were zero rights
Yeah.
and having that kind of understanding that, when a person was born, their sole function was to cut, to work on the plantation, to pick cotton or to cut the sugar cane and just to do all of that. And that is the whole iceberg that you just don't appreciate and that comes up to the tip because we only see the person. I only see you, Val. I don't see and I don't understand. You understand it much more because of, like you said, what your mum said to her and her mum said to her and her mum. This is a generational legacy trauma that has been passed through history.
Yeah.
And that's why really, when we talked, that was the thing that, like, yeah, we are. It's such a mind-blowing thing because as me, I'm upset, or I was much more traumatized what my parents did to me. And when you think about it, it's just one generation. And their parents did to them, and then but that totally disappears through the black society because it was this narrative.
It was constant. You used the word systemic previously. Yeah, it's systemic trauma.
Yeah.
And it's compounded by having a black or brown body operating in a white space that has the legacy. Because at the same time, white society was doing its own work. And part of white society's work is either, at best, paternalistic and at worst, racist. So then you're occupying a white space, having to deal with these systemic discriminations.
And then you're seeing
with the history and the history of resilience. So what that does. So when certain things happened to me at school, I remember not sharing. I had a couple of really traumatic experiences and I didn't tell my parents. It was really traumatic because of the color of my skin. And I didn't tell my parents because I was taught to be resilient. I was taught to be resilient. So what I did, I connected to that resilience. Fortunately, my father always told us that we were royalty. So I grew up thinking I was royal anyway. So my dad found a way around it because my dad belongs to one half of his family. They call the Maroons, and the Maroons are very rebellious people, and they fought the slave master and set up their own system in Jamaica, right? So they are a respected community, and so one of the narratives of the Maroons is that their children are royalty. They have not just surrendered to white domination. So that kind of informed my sense of distinctiveness and informed my resilience as well. But there were traumatic experiences. But I'm just saying that to say there's quite a lot that comes together, as you were trying to describe it, that comes together. I think for me, another important element is the impact on the structuring of the physical and the mental and the spiritual effect that has. The work in epigenetics, for example, is showing, when they've looked at the children of Holocaust survivors, how it has impacted it's had the genetic markers begin to change negatively and positively. but that the fact is that there is a change that takes place. And I think of the biblical text to say the sins of the father visits a third and fourth generation. And so if you redefine sin as pain, because an aspect of sin is pain and trauma, right? It visits the third and fourth generation. It does actually do its work at transforming and bringing about change in such a terrible way. That is an aspect of Caribbean culture. It's an aspect of Caribbean. And in there's creativity and there's innovation and all of that. There's a lot of incredible positive things, but focusing in on Black women's high rates of singleness is one of the ways that we can begin to have those conversations of healing.
Yes, because once you have the family unit, you have healing, right? And
it becomes more possible.
Yes.
I think when people are intentional and they choose, if you've been through a trauma, one of the things that you do is disassociate from yourself. So part of the healing will require that you choose yourself. And then when you choose yourself, you should be able to choose somebody who's like you. That healing isn't about, I've chosen myself and I now want to be chosen by white society.
Because of that historic legacy.
Yeah.
That just following you through the
You should
generations.
have the capacity to choose people from your own community. That would be part of the healing. And I think that when you look at the rates of marriage within our communities, it suggests that we have not developed the capacity to choose each other. Even though our parents chose themselves, that was not intentional because they were Caribbean people from the Caribbean, blah, blah, blah. But now that we're in white spaces, what happens is that you need narratives of intentionality so that conversations around rebuilding the community is not just a group of women sitting there by themselves talking about building the community, which is a lot of that happens. I went to an event last week and it was just nearly all women talking about community development. Yeah. That a lot of that happens. How can you build a community when you haven't got any warriors? You need the warriors to be there. But a lot of our warriors are either not there or what I refer to as unavailable. So we have high incarceration rates of Black men, for example, in the mental institutions. And those that succeed in general, there's a greater likelihood that they will not marry a Black woman. So then that's got economic implications. So this economist, Claude Anderson, does quite a lot of work on that. He talks about financial lovemaking within the Black community. How can you build the economic base so that the next generation can thrive and we can have sufficient networks? We don't have sufficient networks to build businesses, etc. The economic base is so fragile because it goes back into white society. Yeah. So, and this is, as I said, it's not about disparaging people that make that decision. What's important is that we need to be informed so that when we're in our communities and we make decisions to love and to couple, that we know what we're doing. We know, we actually know. So people are aware that this is the impact of your choice. And you go ahead and you're still celebrated, but understand that this is the impact of your choice, however way it goes. And for women, for Black couples that come together, that has its own challenges as well. But it's about an intentionality, informed decisions to choose each other or not to choose each other, but know why you're doing what you're doing, rather than it's all individualistic and the community can only develop if we can get funding from the local authority. Where is agency? Where is dignity? Where is self-actualization? So marriage and black on black love becomes a space to generate those dignified conversations.
And so then moving to today, your work really focuses on trying to teach women to choose themselves
Ultimately, yeah.
and to go through
And
the healing of the intergenerational trauma that has
yeah,
been systemically passed through.
yeah, absolutely. So
And
it's about so like things that's part of our culture that we laugh about and we think so for example, I don't know if you've been to, I'm sure you've been to a few Caribbean weddings. One at weddings or at social events, one of the things that Caribbean like people like to speak about is being beaten as a child.
yeah,
That's just that's like part of the repertoire of a social gathering,
yeah,
and people will talk about how they were beaten, and people will fall about laughing. And somebody else would want to say that no, I got beaten more violently, and it will just be maybe not the younger generation, but certainly I went to a wedding. Let me tell you, it was about 10 years ago. That was the last time I was shocked, actually. It was about 10 years ago. And people were falling about laughing because they were talking about being beaten. Violence is an aspect of Caribbean culture because violence was a civilizing tool. Violence was a way in which the slaves were controlled. And violence was a way in which parenting took place because it ensured that children were kept safe. So if, for example, a slave saw the slave master coming into the field because he wanted to take one of the daughters, the mother would turn around and start beating the daughter and cursing her and saying you're lazy and you're hopeless and you're rubbish as an act of protection for the daughter. And that became a way of parenting where you would really curse your child. And that's just passed on from generation. And people don't even know why they're doing it. And they just feel away. And that this child is cheeky. I'm going to deal with this child. So I'm going to bring this child under subjection before they get too big and start beating them at an early age. So there's all these, and they will say, this is people, people say, oh, my mum really knew how my dad used to beat me, but I'm so happy for the beatings because it's made me a better man or whatever. It's just a cultural repertoire.
so so you basically, when you talk to these people, the gathering, and you take your, what is it? What is the name of your,
The course.
yeah, the
It's
course?
called Black Women's Transformational Training.
Okay.
Black Women's Transformational
So
Training.
when you take people through Black Women's Transformational Training, how do you take them on this journey? And what it has been what have you noticed through that?
Yeah.
And then what is the result? You talked about the 4 weddings, but the
But
people
yeah,
who don't,
get
what is
married.
the result?
Mm.
Because obviously getting married is great, but is there anything else that happens?
Yeah. Okay, so what happens? I employ I bring together a sociological and spiritual lens, right? And I don't do the psychology. Number one, I'm not a psychologist, even though I've done psychology. But I use the sociological lens to give them an opportunity to explore their experiences as Black women from a collective lens, their experiences of singleness from a collective lens, and to understand the sociology of Black women's singleness. So I give them some understanding of how societies are formed and how groups are formed and the dynamics of that. And by doing that, one of the impacts of that kind of interpretation is an opportunity to see their singleness not just as individual trauma, but as a statement suggesting that there is something that has gone wrong as a pathology within the community. And not just to see it through a kind of feminist liberatory lens, but to link it, as I said, with economics, with social development, with legacy building for children. So it's a completely different interpretation. And then what that does, it takes away the sense of personal shame or personal failure. And they begin to say, aha, oh, so it's not that I'm unattractive. It's just that our community has a problem. And that gives a lot of energy to women who are 45, 50, and they've been trying to get married at 22 or whatever. That brings some energy to their exhaustion, right? And then after that, once that's settled through the different kind of theoretical lenses that I show them, so I do a little kind of pseudo-sociological journey with them. I then explore the spiritual implications of that and how, no, not just the impact on their spirit, but unraveling some of the spiritual laws that are at work in community building. Because each culture, each community, each nation, their identity work is also influenced by spiritual laws that have been made available by God. For example, the story of the flood.
Right.
So the biblical narrative around the flood, and then what happened afterwards was that the people wanted to build a tower to say that, to ensure that if there's another flood, they can escape, or they're going to create their own god or whatever. But they started to build this edifice, and the narrative goes that God looks down and he sees that they're building this tower, and he says, we have to confound the language, because anything that they imagine to do, they will do. God confounds the language. And then I show them the central role of language in the creation of communities, because that fulfills a law about agreement. There's a law about agreement. Nothing can be achieved unless two or more people agree. So you've got to have the law of agreement. And one of the ways in which agreement is contextualized or established is through the communication of ideas. So you've got to have the same language. And these are laws that God has put in place for all nations to have the capacity to build. So then I say, so we've got to do work on our language. So then we go through the sociology of language. There's some interesting work around that. But then it says anything that they imagine to do. So then we focus on imaginations. And what is that in imagination? And for me, it's interesting that the word imagination, if you break it up, you've got image, nation, right? So I say we have to saturate our cultural imaginations with positive images. And an aspect of that is you going back into the community as an agent of love, and recognizing that when you speak to young people, you're participating, your desire to be loved, you can pour that back into the community by engaging in new conversations, by saturating young minds with new imaginations. Use the communities that you're involved in, use your power, whatever power that you have, to bring about change and to generate new imaginations that will enable the Black community to rise. Okay? That's an example of kind of intersecting kind of social and spiritual laws.
Yep.
And how if you are actively involved in sowing those kinds of seeds, then you will reap. So it's sowing and reaping. You will reap the benefits of being a love activist in a broken community. And it's going to be you are on the way to love. I do not guarantee marriage or whatever, but I definitely say to the women, you will become much more like you got build, make, create, innovate. You're going to be a builder, a maker, a creator, an innovator in a different way, not on this kind of burdensome, I'm a strong Black woman and I have to carry everything, but in a much more informed way on your journey towards finding your mate or being found by your mate. It's those kind of dynamics that we engage with so that it shifts their experiences of being single and single, alone, and failed, which is how some of them feel, to single but actively engaged as social agents of love within our community.
That's deep. So that's for all of us, really.
It's for everybody.
Because that's why it's so important to share what you're doing. And so when you take the black women on the journey, what do you find is the outcome at the end? How do you see the transformation happen? Or is there a transformation? What do you mean? Because you've done this for four cohorts.
Yeah. So the transformation is quite varied. You just hope, energy. I think the biggest thing is dignity. Like, they're dignified anyway. They do I think to belong to a cohort of women who are seen globally as the least desirable, that's actually a sociological fact.
Right. That
black women are seen as the least desirable on the planet. All the research suggests that. It's like black women and Asian men.
Okay.
Yeah. So to navigate that, to walk around in that body and to live life through that body with such dignity and poise, to me, is something of a celebration. And to say that to them and for them to realize that, hang on a minute, like all of this stuff that goes on when people come together and they start sharing their stories, and we're still standing.
Yeah.
And we still give to our communities. Who are we? We're some kind of, you see what I mean? So it's a moment for celebration. And to put down the things that beset, it's the ability. So I say to them, learn to say no. Start saying no where you can say no, and begin to embrace your womanly side. And why is it that depictions of women that need to be cared for, why are they usually blonde or white or fragile looking? Why can't you position your life in a way that demands that you be cared for as well? If you don't have a partner, you've got brothers, you've got cousins, begin to engage in relationships in a very different way and begin to withdraw. So it's those kinds of things. So there's that. The other thing is that some of the women use the training to go on to climb the career ladder, which they might contact me and say, oh my goodness, I've just got this amazing job. And then I'll listen and celebrate with them. And I'll say, but have you got a partner? Because that's why you did the course. You already have those competencies to get. So you've used the energy from the course to climb the corporate ladder even more. So you need to go back and use that energy towards getting a partner. So I challenge them in that way. It's like, oops, oh yeah, kind of thing. So there's that. Sometimes the women forget. That's what I find the most frustrating, is that they forget. It's like, what did we do again? Oh my goodness, I have to go back to my notes, because the way in which we've been socialized is so ingrained. It's so intense. Those memories and those narratives are so strong that just going on a course for 5 months or doing 5 sessions with me is not enough. It's just not enough. But it's just so much work that needs to be done, so much that needs to be unraveled. But as I said, it's a spiritual work as well. So I engage in holding them together spiritually and trying to guide them towards the way of God as well. There are multiple, and marriage. We've had our first baby. First baby is 4 months old now. There are lots of levels of celebration. There's lots. It's complex. It's revealed to me even more how much work needs to be done in terms of self-loathing. Because if you can't choose yourself, ultimately, if you can't choose yourself, how can you expect anybody to want to be with you? That's just for everybody, isn't it? Loving yourself as somebody with melanin, and actually celebrating the incredible benefits of having a melanated body. They're just so many benefits, which that narrative needs to be really amplified. I'm looking at my mother and my aunts and thinking, oh my, they look absolutely incredible. So rather than seeing it as a deficit, which is what society generates, and it's really promoted in the Black communities as well. The more melanin you have, the more problematic your life can be as a woman, and the least that you have. You see what I mean? So it's, and then the hairism, issues about hair and all of that. We bring that all into the conversation, and it's exhausting because you're dismantling a lot of stuff. It makes you hypercritical. You feel like one step forward, 10 steps back. It opens up, your eyes have been opened, and you can see how rocky the terrain is. And you have to make a commitment to go forward. And what fuels that energy can be, I'm doing this for the next generation. This is legacy work. This is legacy work, because if we don't break the cycle of the plantation and enslavement, then it will continue. It will continue to do its nasty work.
Wow. And those women who got married, were they crediting your course for this, or do you
they
think?
do, yeah.
How do they know?
It might be useful to have a conversation with them as well.
Yes,
But we do that.
We'll do that, I think.
Yeah.
But this is just a intro to see, just to share what
I did ask them,
thought
yeah.
of it.
I said, what was it? And they all said that it was when we had the session on imagination.
I love that one. Image and nation.
Yeah, they said that was really powerful for them. That's what made them see. It's like when God took Abraham and he said, there's all the stars, and your nation is going to be like that.
Yeah.
So God gave him something visual and said, you will be building a great nation. And they realize that the work that they're participating in is significant.
Yeah. Now, the work, the course and the transformation, you talk a lot about spirituality. What happens if you are not spiritually inclined?
Yeah.
And you're listening to this thinking, oh man, I can't get this. How do you address, have you had people that have not been spiritually inclined?
Yeah.
What do you, what is, talk about that, but what is the whole point of the reason why you're putting spirituality in there? And then the people that are not spiritual, how do they resonate with this kind of message?
Yeah. Because I believe that there are different realities.
Right.
There are different realities, and whether or not we accept them, they're doing their work. Those realities are doing their work. And those realities are as credible and as present as dreams.
Right. So this is quite,
they're just as present, as present as dreams. So the way that I go about it is to really look at the scientific endeavor and its function sociologically, the benefits of the scientific endeavor, but the disadvantages, right? So like hyper-rationalism, for example, where people try to be rational about everything. And that's got its place in that dimension, but that it's possible to draw on other dimensions that's available to humans to navigate their lives, and that we should actually be exploiting it. And as Black people, that is how we've survived. That's actually a competence for us.
What the different realization for the different...
The spiritual realm is the reality that I'm referring to. So it's one of the realities. And that is how Black people have got through, how they've survived, miracles and all of those things. Some people might refer to it as fairy tales or whatever. They are palpable and they are real in our community. So what are you going to do? Just leave it there when you've got 100 stories of strange things, incredible things that have happened? Are you going to leave it there? Or are you going to pull it together and use it? So for people who are not spiritually inclined, they leave challenged. by the possibility of following on in the way. They're challenged to do so. And when you really understand how rationality has done a disservice, because we can use rationality to look at causal relations, we want to build something, we have reasonableness and professionalism. These are the benefits of rationality, and they manifest itself in Western society, and it's an aspect of civilization to be rational.
Yes,
Yeah,
trust the science, right?
yeah, to trust the science. And it has its place, and it should be respected, but it has its place.
Mhm.
But we can look elsewhere as well. And there are other causal relationships. There are spiritual causal relationships that are unknown to us. And as people who are traveling in the way, the truth and the light, we have a responsibility to point out those causal spiritual relationships. To understand that, to understand the way of God is not just about promoting a particular denomination. It's not about that.
Right.
It's about discovering that way and then saying to somebody else, look at this way. You can walk this way. There are many, in the slave narratives, there are many stories of, I'm just thinking, for example, of Harriet Tubman, who had visions. She is a tiny little woman, but she managed to help about 70 slaves escape. And one of the competencies that she used was visions. And the Holy Spirit really did guide her. Something guided, something that was otherworldly guided her to liberate these slaves. A tiny little woman facing, in America, facing guns and whatever. She would be traveling one way and the Spirit would say to her, stop and go left. And she just kept going back and forth, and she was just so moved to fulfill her mission, which is to be part of the Underground Railroad. And it wasn't pure rationality. That had its place as spirituality. So it's about recognizing these stories, that the spiritual aspects of our inheritances, what we have inherited as a people, and not losing that as part of our desire to integrate into white society, but using it as an important tool for legacy work. So I have some really interesting stories in my own personal life. So I don't, when we're together in our private space, I share those stories.
So you're basically giving Black women a safe space to explore all of these without judgment, in essence.
Yeah.
And sharing them on a journey. And you do this over, what did you say? You do this over 5 months? Or
It's different. So sometimes I do it over 5 months. Sometimes I do it over 7 months. And it's just like one session per month. Or it could be, if you do it bespoke, you could do it over a couple of months. It all depends on who I'm working with. But I do find that the longer the space is between each session, because it means that once they learn something, they can go out and practice it. And then they can come back and share. Then they go out and practice some more. But if it's just bam, sometimes they don't get, it's too much. It's just too much information. They need to live out and walk through some of the principles that they are discovering.
Wow. So are you planning on doing this more?
Yeah, I'm going to, yeah, absolutely. I want to do an event. So as I said, I did something at Reading University called the Audacity of Black Love. And that's where I was showing the sociology of Black love. And I want to do that again. So if people can be looking out for that.
Yeah, that's good. We'll give all the details at the end, right? Because I think this, to me, this is such an important concept, trying to heal the generational trauma. Because it's not just Black people that had trauma generational. We all can think of what my granddad did, grandparents, and they're all dragging their stuff. And then when you think, that's why I loved this, when we talked how this is applicable to everyone. And just what you said about the imagination, right? It's universal and it can help anyone. And I love that. It helped me to understand that realistically, we all need to stop and choose ourselves first and not carry all the baggage. I know that's easy to say, right? But it's quite difficult to do. And the thing with your work, you're not just talking about one woman, you're talking about a community and healing and healing. And that's why I think it's really important for everyone to start thinking. What would you tell people who resonate with what they're saying? Most people instinctively know what you've said is true. What kind of things could they start doing to help heal themselves and to start choosing themselves? Obviously, they can come to your course, which we'll share the details later. But what other things can they do practically now? So, if there is a black woman here listening, and she's so moved, and what is the first step that you think that could help her to start this journey?
I suppose
I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah. I was going to say, buy the book, The 7 Habits.
Yeah, that's
okay.
So that's the first thing you could read.
Begin reading around your. I think the first thing would be to see that you are part of a wider network. I think this is something that rationalism has given to us. It's given us individualism, and that's dangerous, right? You can't build a community if everybody's being individualistic. You've got to be interdependent. So stop seeing yourself and your quest to marry as an individual act, and begin to explore the significance that your desire to marry is so significant and important for little black girls and boys to see, and that you can participate in love right now by telling yourself that you are worthy of love, and begin loving yourself. I think I would say that. And I think more importantly, in my book, one of the first principles I say, you've got to recognize that you matter to God. Say Black Lives Matter. Say, but you matter to God. You did not come here by chance. You are not an accident. You're alive today because there's something for you to achieve, and you matter to God. I think to sit with that notion that you matter to God, really sit with it, will challenge you. Is there a God? How did I get here? Some of them are more fundamental questions, and you have to grapple with that. And if you can end up at the end of that process accepting that you did not choose to be here, but you're here. So there must have been some incredible process for you to get here. And then, okay, there's a creator. We talk about us being creative and whatever. That's because it comes from somewhere else. There is a creator, and you matter to this creator. Some people call it the universe, or people have different names for it. And reach to that point. Do that work. Do that point. Do that kind of work. And then your life becomes, your interpretation of your existence is then saturated with purpose. But then you start asking different questions.
And purpose gives power.
Absolutely.
And that purpose you choose.
Yeah. Good.
I love that. I think that's a lot to think about. And healing, we all want healing.
We all want healing. We all need healing, and we can get on the road to healing. And that's why I love I Am the Way, because that's the way towards healing. Ultimately, one of the things I've discovered is that every human being is traumatized.
Yes.
And there are different stories that illuminate trauma. So in the Bible, we're told, for the least of these, Patrick Johnson talks about this. There's a text that says it's almost whatever you're doing, think about the least of these. Because if you think about the least of these, therein lies all the information about how we all feel.
Yeah.
To some extent. And what if we can find the solution for the least of these, and if we can embrace the least of these, then we can embrace everybody, whatever the least of these is in whatever context we're talking about. So within the context that I'm working in, the market field of relationships, in my work around, when I lecture on field theory, right, there are different fields. And there's one field which I refer to as the market field of relationships. And this is a heterosexual field that I'm referring to. And men and women are in there, and they're unmarried and they're looking for partners, or they're uncoupled and they're looking for partners. And in that field, there are rules of the game. And some people have a greater capacity to win in that field more than others. And there's some who are the least. And according to sociological research around the market field, Black women are the least.
Yeah.
So to get the least of these to then begin to recognize that they are royalty, as my dad would say, that they matter, that's powerful.
That's very...
And they deserve to be loved, not that they're strong and they should be there for everybody, to be the cook and you are amazing, can I lean on you for guidance, but that they matter and they are fragile and they are women and they are feminine and all of those things, to me, is an important starting point. So I've said that in a long way, but
no, to me, that I just feel lighter after our conversation, because you've really highlighted, you're going into the corners and a shining light where light is not usually gone to, right, in the soul. And you're wiping away the cobwebs of trauma. And we know that this is a really important factor because you feel free. Because I think once you go through all of that, whole concept is just the freedom you want. I think, I don't know, I know for me, being a dad and a husband and provider and stuff, freedom is something that doesn't really exist. But when I talk to you, it makes me feel like, yes, I matter. I am chosen by God to do something. And that gives me a lot of freedom, because it takes away all the trauma and all the bits that we all have. And so I'm really grateful that we can talk about all of this stuff. And I hope that other people who listen to this and hear it can start going through, because we've all built up a crust, right, of toughness around ourselves, trying to say no, and then we only expose the gooey center to only a few people. And what I'm hearing you're saying is, you should be gooey all the time, really, because that goo then spills over to others. What is the non-confrontational aspect? There's a book that I can't remember that talks about having a non-confrontational approach to life. I can't think of what it is now, but that's what you're saying in essence. Work on yourself and then put yourself out there. So for people that want to, what's the book called again?
The 7 Habits for Black Women Who Want to Marry. And you can get that on sistersconversations.com. Not sister, but sistersconversations.com.
Amazon? No, you can't get it? No.
I don't do it.
Okay. And where can they go to? Do you have any social media that you're doing? You've got Instagram account?
Yeah. So there's Audacity of Black Love.
No, but what's the handle called? I think is Audacious Black Love.
Oh yeah, audaciousblacklove.com or audaciousblacklove.co.uk.
So you've got the website.
Yeah.
And you've got Instagram. I forget what is the handle.
Well, that's the Instagram.
Audacious Black Love?
Yeah, .com.
No, that's the internet.
I can't remember. You can delete this bit. Have you switched it off? Or are we still on it?
No, we're
Fix
still
it
on it.
up.
Yeah, so it is Audacious Black Love. So on Instagram, it's Audacious Black Love. There is no posts at the moment, but you're working on this. Is all very
Yeah,
fresh and new.
yeah.
And what are you hoping? So if we go all around, what are you hoping that when you look back at your life, this program does? Or what is your vision when you lie down in bed? How do you see success? Or what do you want the world to know about Audacious Black Love? What is your ultimate goal for all of this? I know it's
No,
a
I do.
I know it's a big
It's a
question.
big question, but I do. I'm thinking, can I articulate it?
'Cause to me, and if
It's it's to centralize. It's the next stage in Black liberation.
okay,
It's the next stage in Black liberation. That Black liberation or African descended liberation must entail intense and audacious narratives of choosing, of embracing each other. That liberation is not achieved when it's just about being accepted by other cultures and other societies. Because if you look at when Black bodies go anywhere in the world, when I talk to my Black friends who travel the world, one of the first things that they do when they want to travel is it a safe place to be as a Black person? That's one of the, because you just want to go and have a good holiday and have a good time. But if you know that your body and what it signals, particularly as a man, can be quite disarming to yourself, to yourself. So there is this desire within Black cultures, African descended cultures, about belonging and acceptance. That's part of our identity work, because there's been so many experiences of not belonging and having to work. My mum used to say you have to work 3 times harder than your friends to achieve. That's just, you just use up a lot of life energy. Takes you a long time to do things.
that reminds me. Have you seen that Netflix film the 688 about the Black
Yeah, the
unit?
military women, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
because that's
exactly.
exactly what they
That's
said
it.
in the film.
Yeah, and that's just normal. We're all told that. Since as soon as you go 3, 4, 5, your parents start telling you. So you go into school and then you with this energy, you've got to work. You have to you just have to do. It's so exhausting, and it causes us to get ill when we get into our 40s and 50s. We actually become ill because of that.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
I think Dr. Gabor Mate talks about the trauma and the body. So
Yeah, Black women just get sick. They just get ill. It's incredible because it's just a lot of energy work. So rather than do that, and the wider society is doing their work and they're becoming a bit more accommodating in some parts, but they're becoming more aggressive in other parts as well. Other parts of the world they're pushing back at us. We need to come together and we need to build our own castle the way that we've done it in the past. We need to build our own castles and we need to accept each other and we need to embrace each other and love each other globally. At people of African descent, we need to create new images or reclaim old images of who we are as a people and leave that for our children.
and that starts in the family. That
It starts within the self, really.
okay, sorry, yeah, self.
Yeah, but as a community, yeah, your family, once you've got safe spaces. Sometimes my husband and I will go shopping. We've been stopped. Oh, it's just so amazing to see like a Black couple where you just look like you really people. They've said that to us. Black women, it's just beautiful to see a Black couple who are so obviously affectionate and in love with each other. Oh, thank you. You're just getting on with your shopping.
Yeah.
These are important symbols. I love my husband and he loves me, and we're very open about it. And we both recognize in a very organic way the importance of us showing love to each other for little black girls and boys.
Yeah.
That's what
What drives you to heal.
it's
And
legacy work. It's
yeah.
legacy work. We have been a traumatized people, and we have knocked on so many doors to be accepted, but we need to knock on each other's doors to heal.
So this has been really brilliant, Val. Thank you so much for explaining this. I hope everyone has been enlightened like I have. The question I have is, okay, so what's next? You said you mentioned you're doing another session. Can you explain what it is, how people get in touch with you, and what you want?
Okay, so I'm going to be running another transformational course for black women who want to marry. So this is going to take place sometime in April. And so if you're interested, you can contact me you can DM me on Instagram, Audacious Black Love. And also I'm going to be doing a session on the audacity of black love, which will be a Zoom session sometime in March. So that will be a session that's open to all, really, to come along. And if you're interested, you'll get information. I will have that up on my Instagram account.
And the other thing, your name is on, if you Google Val Bernard Allan, you'll find your LinkedIn, your Twitter.
Yeah.
And Val is not exactly the most web savvy person, but we're changing with that. And so just, DM her on Instagram or reach out to her on LinkedIn or Twitter. And the website is called sistersconversations.com.
Yeah, on sistersconversations.com you can access the book.
Yeah.
And so there's a book, and also you can access a free chapter of the book on sistersconversations.com.
Brilliant, Val. Thank you so much for your time, and let us know how you enjoyed our conversation.